Alright, so this is going to be part 1 to what if Asta had light magic. So with that being said, let's just roll the intro.
Bow in the presence of greatness. 'Cause right now that has forsaken us. You should be honored by my lateness. That I would even show up to this fake shit. So go ahead, go nuts, go.
Alright, so this is a what if that I wanted to do for quite a bit of time, but I just didn't really have a story in my head to really make for this video, but I do now as I've been thinking about it a lot lately. So let's start off with Asta's childhood and what it means to have this type of magic, that being light magic. So with Asta having light magic, he'll be able to know pretty much right away, as unlike certain types of magics, they are more easily, I guess, visual when it comes to not having a grimoire. For example, in the show and the manga, you're able to see a lot of the 4 elements and spin-offs of those visually without a grimoire really easily. But when it comes to more complex magic, you don't really see them being used without their grimoire all too often. And if you do, it's not really that out there, or it's very subtle when it comes to how it's visualized. And this could be one of the reasons why in canon, Asta thought that he could have magic, just not, out there yet, or he could have been a late bloomer in his words. But yeah, let's actually get into the story. So Asta, like I said before, will be able to visualize his magic more, and because of this, he'll know what magic he has. At first, it would be kind of weak, as it only be used to light up areas and small rooms basically. But as he would get older, he would start to become faster than he could really react to. So he would have races with Yuno, and it would end with him basically crashing into a wall because he wouldn't be able to stop himself. And because Yuno was with someone who also has magic around the same age as him, I think this would push him, just like he was in canon. How Asta would always want to train with Yuno, it'd be the same case here, because both of them would want to still become the Wizard King because of the stories that Sister Lily would tell him. Eventually we would come to the part where Asta's around the age of 10, and this is where he gains the reaction time to go along with his speed. Not only that, but this is around the time people started acknowledging Asta about his light magic, because before they didn't really know how powerful it would be or really anything like that, because how rare light magic is within Black Clover. Now the next part I am gonna say might upset a lot of people because of wanting the main character to be overpowered, but in this I don't think Asta would become as physically strong as he is now, and the reason for that is because in canon Asta didn't know if he had magic or not, and therefore he wanted to train his body just in case it would help his magic, or just in case he couldn't have it in general, and that's why he trained his body. But in this, because Asta knows he has magic and definitely knows the elements, he doesn't really need to, and instead works more on his magic than his physical body. Not to say that he wouldn't be strong at all, because of how he lives and his kind of lifestyle with the farming and things like that, and how he would somewhat train with Yuno a little bit. He would still become a little bit strong, but not as strong as he was in canon. So around the same strength of Yuno, or a little bit more, as we could tell that Asta might have some sort of genetics that help with gaining muscle, as we see in the 6-month time skip, as Asta was able to gain so much in such a little bit of time. So it's completely possible that he has some sort of genetics that help with that. But yeah, to put that in perspective, I believe Yuno has a strength of 3 in the manga, so Asta would probably also have a 3 or even a 4, because even though characters could have the same stats in terms of, the number system, it doesn't mean they're necessarily the same strength, because there's a lot of characters that are 5 in physical strength, but obviously they're not all the same strength, because at the time Veto was stronger than Asta, and then you could go down the list from there. So I hope that makes sense. Now let's talk about the incident with Yuno and the drunk man in the village, the time in where Yuno had to deliver a letter to a village chief to get some supplies for the church. Now I think it would be similar to how it was in canon, as I believe Asta and Yuno, between the two, Yuno would still be the more, I guess, reasonable one, and therefore would be chosen to send the letter instead of Asta. But I think Asta would still come along, probably from the back, to help Yuno out, or at least protect him in case something were to go wrong. And the incident between the Junkman and Asta would be similar, as Asta doesn't really have any attack spells, and I think the man would still have the same threat that he did to Yuno towards Asta as well, because, well, he's an adult and he has his Grimoire, and Asta at this point doesn't really have that much experience with magic, because remember, although they have a lot of magic, they have no one to really teach him anything about magic control or anything like that, so he would be fairly weak in terms of offensive power, especially with light not having any mass to it. So basically, it'd be the same as canon at this point, and this is also around the time where Yuno would get inspired by Asta to become the Wizard King, just like him. So yeah, we could skip a few years until they're around the age of 15 and they have to go and get their grimoires. So Asta and Yuno would both get 4-leaf clover grimoires. This would obviously shock everyone around there, as the light from both grimoires would appear out of almost nowhere, and especially for Asta, who has light magic, light would obviously come off of there, especially since it's also a 4-leaf grimoire, so it's even more brighter than, well, Yuno. And both of them get the grimoire and they see what magic they have. Now Asta didn't have a definite answer, because although it is light, they didn't know if it was something slightly different or not, and with something like wind or the other 4 elements, it's really easy to know what you have. Now the two would be super excited, and this is where they would make their pledge to become the Wizard King and have their rivalry basically shown to everyone. Now in canon, Yuno was the one who basically dismissed Asta at the beginning, but because both of them get a grimoire at the same time, this is where they both acknowledge each other, and everyone there is, well, jealous, especially the nobles that really didn't get that great of grimoires. So this is where they plan to essentially destroy the competition, going after Yuno. So the reason why they find Yuno first is because Asta, being excited to get his grimoire, would immediately go to the woods and to the demon's skull to go and practice, while Yuno would stay back and basically get, well, jumped by the nobles. There, Yuno would easily take him out until the Chain Mage, a former purple orca, would actually come to take Yuno's grimoire. Now, he knows that he can't, well, use it, but he wants to sell it for a price, because 4-leaf grimoires are really rare, especially in the Clover Kingdom, and where they're basically idolized. So Yuno would be chained up, and this is where essentially he thinks his grimoire is going to be taken away. It's only until Asta actually comes by to help him. Now Asta, after getting his grimoire, his speed has increased dramatically, and I mean a lot, and he tries to rush the Chain Mage, and actually does, but it was too fast for Asta to react to. Now Asta does have an incredible reaction time, but not as much as he needs for this level of speed. Because imagine this, let's say that Asta was around sound level, or the speed of sound, and now he's approaching the speed of light. That jump is way too big for him to, well, get adapted to that easily. Now it's not exactly the speed of light at this point, but it's very close. So when Asta connects with the Chain Mage, and let's say that he punched him in the face, now this would be an extreme level of damage here, as the Chain Mage would try to use a bunch of its chains to, well, protect himself, but Asta would just blow through it with his incredible amount of speed, and this would actually cause the Chain Mage to basically break his jaw because of how powerful the punch was. Now it was a little bit cushioned from the chains, as the Chain Mage would create basically a cocoon of chains, and this would slow it down significantly. So if Asta did actually hit him with that amount of force, it would be possible that he may have died from that being the Chain Mage, or at the very least need medical attention. After Asta basically recovers from the crash that he would have had, because he wouldn't be able to stop himself and he would hit the walls that were there, he would get himself back up, and he'd be kind of injured himself, as he wasn't really ready for that type of speed, and his body wasn't either. So I would say that he'd probably not have broken bones at this point, but maybe a fracture, and he would need to go get healing from Sister Lily. And at this moment, Asta and Yuno would have that kind of reunion like they had before, and where they basically have that fist bump. Now, over the months of training that Asta would have in preparation for the Magic Knights entry exam, he would have some time to himself and a little bit of time with his master, that being Funzel Kruger. Now, this was the person who basically taught Asta how to use a sword. Now, Asta would still meet up with him, as Funzel was the one who met up with Asta at the Demon Skull. Him being on the run and not having any supplies would, well, help Asta, because Asta would give him some food. Now, Asta would not have the same amount of time to, well, learn about swordsmanship. This is due to the fact that he would still need to know or learn about magic control, which wasn't really a problem before until he's got his Grimoire. As well, in canon, he didn't really have that problem because he had no magic, but in this, he does need that. So we could skip the few months that he has for training, as it would still follow the story essentially, with no real big changes here or there, and Asta and Yuno would be off to the capital. Now, we could skip again until they actually get there, and this is where they get in line. Obviously, Asta would still meet up with Seke and get their numbers. Now, the person giving out the numbers for different grimoires and people there would be shocked that 2 back-to-back 4-leaf grimoires would basically show up. Not only that, but from the same village as well. This would give a lot of suspicion, and they would basically put a target on themselves, as these are people that everyone needs to beat because they're the strongest, or at least have the most potential. Now, in the courtyard, Asta and Yuno wouldn't be surrounded by anti-magic birds, as they are, well, filled with mana, a lot more than a lot of people there. But one bird does have their eye on Asta, and that is Nero, or Seker. Basically, because Asta has a 4-leaf grimoire, and it just so happens to be light magic, just like the first Wizard King, she has an interest on him, as he has a lot of potential. Not only that, but him being a peasant and him wanting to become the Wizard King would help with her and the first Wizard King's dreams of equality among the different classes. Now, that's why she's interested in him. So let's go over the different fights and exams that Asta would have to do and how well he would do in those. Now, Asta, having some of that teachings from Funzel, he would have a higher, well, magic control. But Asta didn't have that high level of control like Yuno does. In fact, at the beginning, it was rather low. Like I said before, him having low reaction speed and him not being able to really control his speed all too well with those crashes that I talked about before. So let's just say that he has a normal amount of magic control, but it's still pretty hard to control his magic because there's just so much of it and the properties that his magic has, if that makes sense. Now, he would get a decent score with the general categories, like the ability to fly a magic broom, target practice, as well as projecting his own magic. He'd be able to do things like that. Now, when it comes to the fight, I think Seke would see Asta struggle a lot with some things and would take this opportunity to go against him. And with Asta having the 4-leaf grimoire, it would make him seem better if he was able to defeat Asta. Now, in this fight, he would do the same thing as normal, and that would be make that speech about having a cushy job as a Magic Knight. Obviously, this would get Asta angry, and they would start to fight. Now, Asta in this fight isn't the best when it comes to his swordsmanship, as he didn't have that much time to practice the sword, especially with him not having a sword at the beginning and only meeting Funzel a couple months after the training. Now, because of this, his footwork is a little bit off, and combined with the speed causes him to trip. This is where Seke would try to take advantage of this and use his bronze magic to attack Asta. Now, Asta would quickly recover from this, but the way it looks from the captains is very disappointing. They see this person with a 4-leaf grimoire fighting against this low-class noble, because remember, Seke is still a noble, and it isn't impressive at all to them. It's rather embarrassing to see someone with such a great potential fight someone like Seke and basically be almost even because of certain factors. But after a while, and this is where Asta gets his footing back, he actually does end up one-shotting Seke, but again, like I said before, it doesn't look very impressive. It looks rather disappointing. Imagine you have two weak characters just fight each other, and all they're doing is kind of wasting everyone's time. Now keep in mind that Yuno still has to go, and his fight is way more impressive than Asta. Not only is it more visually impressive, but he's also fighting a noble of higher status than Seke. Now let's get on to the part in where the captains pick each person to be on their team or not. Now when it comes to Asta, it would be slightly different than it was in canon, as he would actually have two options here. Now the two options that would open up for him would be obviously Yami, seeing the potential within Asta even if it's unpolished right now, and also Jack. Now the reason why Jack wants Asta is because Asta's really fast, and it would make great hunting practice, because remember, he's a hunter by heart. Not only that, but he does see a little bit of potential within Asta despite being a peasant. We do learn later on that Jack doesn't like to, well, recruit peasants, and actually thought Yami was crazy for recruiting Magna, thinking that Magna was really outside of his element or bit off more than he could chew, to say the least. Now, Jack isn't very pushy when it comes to having Asta on his team. He likes the idea of Asta on his team, but he's not really fully committed. Now, with Yami pushing back towards Jack, saying like, kid, you don't want to be on that guy's squad, he's crazy. And Jack would try to kind of banter back with Yami, calling him the worst squad and all things like that, and Asta would have to choose between the two. It's not really that much of a decision, as Yami basically says, kid, if you don't join my squad, I'll kill you. Then Asta accepts his role as the newest member to the Black Wolves, with Jack slightly upset, but not all too much as he doesn't really care, and he tells Yami, you might get this guy, but I'll definitely get the next rookie. Alright, so I'm going to end it here. I know this one is kind of short compared to my other Black Clover videos that I've done recently, but I just want to get through the first part of this and then get through the next parts of the other Black Clover what ifs. And then yeah, I also have another one coming out soon, relatively, when I get the story fully done for that. And yeah, so if you like this video, please give it a like, as it lets me know that you like this video, as well as it helps up the video and the channel as a whole. So yeah, and remember, if you're not subscribed and you like my content, please subscribe, as I'm going to be making more content later on in the future. So with that being said, let's get into the Patreon shoutout. So if you want to join the patrons over on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/ComicSansTheMan, or you could click the link in the description. Either way, it helps out the channel, and it's another way to support me. So with that being said, it only costs $1, you get my videos early, and you have a chance of getting a drawing from me. I do one each month for each tier, so you have a chance for each time. Now with that being said, let's actually get into the patrons. So in our gold tier, we have Nippy Director, Kenny, Dwayne Fenn, and Lyco. So like I said before, you could join them at patreon.com/ComicSansTheMan, or you can click the link in the description. It helps out the channel quite a lot, and you get my videos early. So with that being said, this is going to be the end of the video. So yeah.